My mother-in-law got arrested at the baby shower she hijacked after physically assaulting me while I'm pregnant. The pregnancy test showed 2 lines. I stared at it, tears welling in my eyes as Lucas wrapped his arms around me. After a year of trying, of disappointments and heartache, we were finally going to be parents. We did it, I whispered, leaning into his chest. His heartbeat quickened against my ear. We're having a baby, Lucas said, his voice cracking with emotion. I love you so much, Anna. Lucas was everything I could have asked for in a husband. Throughout my pregnancy, he attended every doctor's appointment, spent evenings reading parenting books beside me, and painted the nursery exactly the shade of yellow I wanted. At night, his hand would rest protectively over my growing belly, and I'd watch him whisper promises to our unborn child. But beneath our happiness lurked a shadow we both avoided discussing. Diane, my mother-in-law. From the moment Lucas proposed, Diane made it clear I wasn't good enough for her precious son. He could have had anyone, she once said at our engagement dinner, smiling thinly. He's always been so generous. At 58, Diane behaved like Lucas was still her little boy. She called at midnight to check if he was eating properly. When we redecorated our home, she inspected every change with narrowed eyes. This house was my labor of love, she'd say, running her finger across our new furniture. Don't ruin what I built. Her tactics were subtle but relentless. She'd remind Lucas of ex-girlfriends' accomplishments or question my cooking while praising her own recipes. Lucas always loved my pot roast, she'd say, watching me serve dinner. It's nice you're trying, dear. After my previous miscarriage, we decided to keep this pregnancy private until the first trimester passed. Just to be safe, Lucas agreed, kissing my forehead. Our little secret for now. What we didn't realize was that this decision would ignite a war with Diane, one I wasn't prepared to fight. After reaching the 3-month mark, Lucas and I decided to share our news. We reserved a private room at our favorite restaurant and invited both sets of parents and a few close relatives. My heart raced as we waited for everyone to arrive. My mother Sandra spotted it immediately. As she hugged me, she pulled back with questioning eyes, taking in my loose-fitting dress and the glow I couldn't hide. You look different, she whispered, a knowing smile playing on her lips. But she didn't press further. When everyone had settled and ordered drinks, Lucas squeezed my hand under the table and stood up. Anna and I have some news we'd like to share, he announced, his voice steady but eyes shining. We're having a baby. The room erupted in joy. My mother burst into tears, rushing to embrace me. Oh, sweetheart, I've waited so long for this moment. Her hands trembled as she held mine, tears streaming down her face. Everyone was raising glasses and offering congratulations, everyone except Diane. I watched her face transform from shock to something darker. Her expression hardened, lips pressing into a thin line. She slammed her napkin onto the table, knuckles white. What? Pregnant? And you hid this from me? She demanded, voice slicing through the celebration. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to Diane, then to me. Why am I the last to know about this? She continued, eyes locked on me. Who do you think you are to keep this from me? I tried to stay calm. We wanted to wait until after the first trimester just to be sure everything was okay. I am the grandmother, Diane cut me off. I had a right to know from the beginning. You're deliberately cutting me out of my grandchild's life, she accused, pointing a finger at me. Lucas stood up again. Mom, this isn't about who has rights. This was our decision. The tension was suffocating. Diane didn't speak to me for the rest of the dinner, but her fury was palpable as she furiously typed on her phone beneath the table. My mother noticed, squeezing my hand reassuringly. Don't let her ruin this for you. You're pregnant, that's what matters. After dinner, as Lucas walked his parents to their car, I stayed inside but could hear Diane's raised voice. She's controlling you, can't you see that? She shouted. She's coming between us. Lucas's response was uncharacteristically sharp. Enough, Mom. If you want to blame someone, blame me too. This was our decision. That night, as I settled into bed, my phone buzzed with a message from Diane. I am deeply disappointed in you. You've stolen my right to be a grandmother from day one. You're selfish and a terrible wife. You're destroying my relationship with Lucas. I will never forgive this. My hands shaking, I passed the phone to Lucas. His face flushed with anger as he read it. He immediately called his mother, warning her to stop sending hostile messages to me, but Diane wasn't backing down. "She's turning you against me," she laughed bitterly. "You'll regret this." She hung up. Lucas and I looked at each other in stunned silence. We had no idea this was only the beginning of a nightmare that would grow far worse. In the days following Diane's explosive text message, Lucas and I kept our distance from her. We needed peace, especially during this delicate time of my pregnancy. The doctor had warned me about avoiding stress, and Diane was the embodiment of it. Then unexpectedly, Lucas received a call from his mother. "She apologized," he told me afterward, eyes hopeful. "She says she overreacted and wants to make things right." I raised an eyebrow. "Really? Just like that?" "She sounded sincere," Lucas insisted. "She said she never meant to upset you, that she's just excited about the baby." Something felt off, but the relief in Lucas's voice made me hesitate. He wanted so badly to believe his mother could change. A week later, Diane called us both. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice uncharacteristically soft. "I'd like to host the baby shower for Anna." My stomach tightened. "Please, let me do this," she continued. "It's my way of making amends." "I'll handle everything," she promised. "It will be the most perfect celebration for my grandchild." Lucas beamed at me across the room. "That's incredibly generous, Mom." I forced a smile, though warning bells were ringing in my head. This sudden transformation seemed too convenient. After discussing it with Lucas, I reluctantly agreed, but with conditions. "I'd like to be involved in the planning," I told Diane on our next call. "I have some ideas about the theme and venue." "Of course, dear," she replied with sugary sweetness. "This is your special day. I just want to help make it wonderful." I hung up feeling uneasy, but hoping for the best. Maybe she really did want to make amends. Those hopes evaporated quickly. Within days, Diane had booked a venue, not the intimate garden space I'd mentioned, but an ostentatious country club where she was a member. She'd ordered decorations in pale blue, despite us not knowing the baby's gender and my preference for gender-neutral colors. When invitation samples arrived at our house, they read, "Diane welcomes her grandchild" in elaborate gold lettering, with our names appearing much smaller below. "Lucas, this isn't what we discussed," I said, showing him the invitations. He sighed. "She's just excited. Maybe we can ask her to change them?" But when he called Diane, she dismissed his concerns. "Everything's already arranged," she told him. "The stationery store can't redo them in time. It will be fine." My mother noticed my growing anxiety. "Do you want me to talk to her?" Sandra offered after I showed her the invitations. She tried, calling Diane with suggestions for collaboration, but was politely stonewalled. "I appreciate your input, Sandra," Diane responded coolly, "but everything's taken care of. It's going to be such a lovely surprise for Anna." That night, as Lucas slept peacefully beside me, I stared at the ceiling, a knot of dread forming in my chest. I'd allowed Diane back into our lives, and now I was losing control of an event meant to celebrate our child. "It's just one day," I whispered to myself, rubbing my growing belly. "We'll get through it." But deep down, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake in trusting Diane. The shower was still weeks away, but I could already feel the storm gathering on the horizon, and there seemed to be no way to stop what was coming. The day of the baby shower arrived. I'd tried to keep my expectations low, but nothing could have prepared me for what awaited. As Lucas and I walked into the country club's reception hall, I froze in the doorway. The space was decorated in drab beiges and browns, with dim lighting that cast long shadows across the room. It looked more like a funeral reception than a celebration of new life. "What happened to the yellow and green theme?" I whispered to Lucas. He squeezed my hand. "Maybe it looks better inside?" It didn't. My friends stood awkwardly around tables draped with heavy brown linens, exchanging confused glances. I spotted my college roommate mouthing, "Are you okay?" from across the room. But what truly stopped me in my tracks was the enormous banner hanging on the far wall. Instead of customary baby-themed decorations, it displayed a collage of Lucas's childhood photos, dozens of them, arranged in chronological order from birth to high school. Our guests were staring at it, some whispering behind their hands. I heard someone murmur, "Whose shower is this again?" Diane swept over to us, beaming with pride. "Isn't it wonderful? I spent weeks going through all the old albums." She gestured at the banner. "The baby will look exactly like Lucas, so I wanted everyone to see how adorable their father was." My mouth went dry. This wasn't my baby shower anymore. This was Diane's show, with Lucas as the star and me as merely the vessel. I felt my mother's hand grip mine. Sandra's face had darkened as she surveyed the room. Without a word, she marched directly to the banner and in one smooth motion tore it from the wall. The room fell silent. "What do you think you're doing?" Diane shrieked. "I worked for days on that." My mother faced her squarely. "This is my daughter's baby shower, not a tribute to your son." The tension in the room was suffocating. Diane's face flushed crimson, but she knew she was losing control of the situation. She retreated to the bar, downing a glass of champagne in one gulp while glaring at my mother. I looked to Lucas for support, but he stood frozen, eyes darting between his mother and mine. He was clearly torn, and his silence spoke volumes. I took a deep breath. "Let's try to enjoy the day," I said, plastering on a smile for our guests. I wouldn't let Diane ruin this completely, but worse was yet to come. During the cake cutting, Diane clinked her glass repeatedly until the room quieted. She was swaying slightly, the effects of several champagne flutes evident. "I have a special gift for my granddaughter," she announced, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "A perfect name for a perfect little girl." My heart stopped. We hadn't told anyone the baby's gender. We didn't even know it ourselves. "Elizabeth Victoria Marlowe," Diane declared proudly. "After my grandmother, I've already ordered a custom blanket with the monogram." The room grew silent again. My friends looked at me with wide eyes. I felt heat rising in my cheeks but kept my voice steady. "Your granddaughter? I think you're confused. This is my and Lucas's child. We will be the ones choosing a name." Diane slammed her glass down so hard that champagne sloshed onto the tablecloth. "You don't understand family traditions," she hissed. "The Marlowe firstborn girls have carried Victoria in their names for generations." Lucas finally stepped forward. "Mom, we haven't even found out if it's a boy or girl yet, and Anna's right. We'll choose the name together." Diane's face contorted with rage. "You've always let me down, Lucas," she spat. "Always. And now she's turned you against your own mother." That's when everything exploded. After I rejected Diane's chosen name, a terrifying silence fell over the room. Everyone seemed to be holding their breath, waiting for what would happen next. Diane's eyes bulged, her knuckles whitening around her champagne flute. Her breathing became erratic, chest heaving with each intake of air. "You ungrateful little wretch," she spat. "I paid for this baby shower, and you dare take away my rights?" I kept my voice level despite my racing heart. "Regardless of who organized it, this is still my child. Lucas and I will make the decisions." Something snapped in Diane. She slammed her glass down so hard it shattered, sending champagne and glass fragments across the pristine tablecloth. "I am the true mother of this baby," she shouted, jabbing her finger at me. "Without Lucas, you would be nothing." Gasps echoed through the room. Diane wasn't finished. "I gave birth to Lucas. Without me, this baby wouldn't even exist. You're just an incubator." The room fell deadly silent. I felt the blood drain from my face as her cruel words sank in. My mother immediately stepped in front of me, her voice razor sharp. "What did you just say?" "I'm telling the truth," Diane roared. "Anna is nothing compared to me. This baby belongs to our family, not her." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Diane, fueled by alcohol and rage, lurched toward me. She shoved me hard enough that I stumbled backward, my hand instinctively covering my pregnant belly. If my mother and friend Melissa hadn't steadied me, I might have fallen. "She's completely insane," someone yelled. I noticed several guests had their phones out, recording everything. The situation had spiraled beyond anything I could have imagined. Diane continued her tirade, oblivious to the cameras. "Anna, you're a witch. You're destroying my family. You're stealing my son from me." I looked helplessly at Lucas, whose face had transformed. His usually gentle features had hardened into something I'd never seen before. His jaw was clenched, fists balled at his sides. "Mother, get out!" Each word was delivered with icy precision, but Diane was too far gone. She began ranting incoherently, hurling insults at me, my mother, and anyone who tried to calm her. I felt genuinely threatened, not just for myself but for my unborn child. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. Diane spotted me and became even more enraged. "How dare you!" She grabbed a gift box from the table and hurled it to the floor. The sound of breaking glass filled the room as whatever was inside shattered. The police arrived with remarkable speed. As soon as they entered, Diane's demeanor changed dramatically. Tears suddenly appeared, her voice adopting a trembling quality. "I'm the victim here," she sobbed. "My daughter-in-law humiliated me. I just wanted to throw a party for my grandchild." The officers glanced around the room, taking in the broken glass, the horrified guests, and the multiple phones still recording. "Ma'am, we've had reports of a disturbance," one officer said calmly. Diane insisted on her innocence, but several guests immediately stepped forward with their recordings. "She assaulted a pregnant woman," my friend Melissa told the officers, showing them her phone. "It's all here." When the police tried to question Diane, she became belligerent again, slurring accusations and refusing to cooperate. Within minutes, they were placing handcuffs on her wrists. "You can't do this to me!" she shrieked as they led her toward the door. "Do you know who I am?" The guests watched in shocked silence as Diane was escorted out. No one moved, no one spoke. The beautiful celebration I had once envisioned had ended with my mother-in-law being arrested. Lucas stood beside me, his face ashen. "Anna, I'm so sorry," he whispered, taking my hands in his. "I had no idea she would—" His voice trailed off. What could he possibly say? In the days following the baby shower disaster, Diane was released on bail. Rather than reflecting on her actions, she immediately began calling relatives, painting herself as the victim. "Anna called the police on me," she wailed to anyone who would listen. "My own son turned against me. Please, you have to help me." But the videos from the party had already circulated through family and friends. The footage captured everything: her drunken rage, her vile words, and most damning of all, her shoving me, visibly pregnant. No one took Diane's side. Several relatives who had previously tolerated her behavior now refused to speak with her. Lucas's cousin Jenna, who had always remained neutral in family conflicts, texted him. "I had no idea it was this bad. I'm so sorry you've had to deal with this your entire life." A week after the incident, Lucas and I sat on our back porch, watching the sunset. The events of the baby shower had forced a conversation we could no longer avoid. "I don't want our child growing up around someone like your mother," I said quietly, my hand resting on my belly. Lucas took a deep breath and nodded. "No more chances. We cut her off completely." The next morning, Lucas called his mother. I sat beside him, holding his free hand as he delivered the final verdict. "What happened at the baby shower wasn't an isolated incident, Mom. It was the culmination of years of your behavior," he said, his voice steady. "You are no longer a part of our family." Diane began to protest, but Lucas continued. "If you try to contact us or come near our child, Anna will call the police again. This time we'll file a restraining order." The weeks that followed were filled with a peace I hadn't felt since becoming pregnant. Without Diane's toxic presence, we focused on preparing for our baby's arrival. Friends held a small, intimate gathering to replace the disastrous shower, this one filled with genuine warmth and love. My mother, Sandra, became a constant support, helping us set up the nursery and sharing advice without imposing her preferences. Lucas's father, Richard, called occasionally, always kind and supportive, never mentioning Diane. Then a month before my due date, Lucas received an unexpected call from his father. "Your mother and I are separating," Richard said. "After what happened at the shower, I just can't do this anymore." Diane was now completely isolated, having destroyed every relationship that mattered, and the consequence she would feel most keenly was never meeting her grandchild. As I felt our baby kick gently against my palm, I smiled, knowing I had protected our little family from a cycle of manipulation and control that might have continued for another generation. Some might call it harsh, but I knew better. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is set boundaries that keep toxic people at bay.